Welcome. Good afternoon. I'm Marcel Rindisbacher. I'm the director of the Mehrotra Institute for Business Markets and Society. And I'm really glad that we can meet today to talk about, I think, a really important topic. I think at this institute, we are much interested in sort of understanding the interconnectedness between the economic system, political system, and I think when you think about capitalism today or so, there are really big questions about what is the role of corporations in politics, how do we see the concentration of power, what does that do to the political system, but also the economic system. So there are really fundamental questions about what is the purpose of the corporations, what the objective should be, how they should interact in the political system, and so on. And I think we have an excellent panel here of experts, and I will leave it to Roy Shapira to introduce the panelists, and I'm really looking forward to a very kind of engaged discussion here, and then also with the audience. So thank you for coming.
Can we? All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Marcel. So thanks, everyone, for being here. Let me spend just 2 minutes on what we're going to talk about and with whom we're going to talk about it before we start. So the title in itself, Cooperation in Politics, is not new. Corporations have always been involved in politics. You know, if I'm a big pharma company, I will always be involved if Congress is debating the Affordable Care Act. If I'm Smith & Wesson, I will always be involved on gun laws. But the feeling is that in recent years, the types of corporate political activities are changing. We're seeing, for example, more and more companies like running campaigns or speaking out or issues that are not really intrinsic to their core business activities. And when they do, they face backlash. When they don't, they face backlash. And so we're going to discuss the mechanics and promises and, of course, the huge perils that come from these types of corporate political activity, both at the company level and at the broader societal level. And for this purpose, we assembled this all-star panel. Like in order, we have Professor Matteo Gatti from Rutgers Law, and a research member at the European Corporate Governance Institute. And the reason we are thrilled to have him here is that, actually I think I have it, is that he wrote the book on corporations in politics just a couple of weeks ago, came out in Cambridge University Press, called Corporate Power, The Politics of Change. To his right, we have Professor David Weber from here, from BU Law. And David wrote out a few years ago one of the most influential and critically acclaimed books to come from legal academia on the rise of the working class shareholders, labor's last best weapon, on how pension funds can, maybe should, use their tens of trillions in assets to influence corporate behavior. Received many teaching awards, has taught in many universities around the world. And if Matteo is going to bring us the kind of internal corporate governance perspective, I think we'll try to focus with David more on the outside the boardroom kind of pressures on corporate political activities. It could be bottom up from employees, it could be from the outside from institutional investors, and perhaps the most important perspective is the business side practitioner perspective. We have here with us Jane Adams from J&J, has been heading a senior vice president, they have been heading their governance affairs. I think you've been doing this, like leading government affairs personnel in Washington for almost 30 years now, right? Over 30 years.
22 at J&J, but
22 at J&J, before that Medtronic, right? Mm-hmm. You know, all those lists that you have, Washington power people, Washington influential actors, power people at the health sector, name a list, Jane is on it, basically. Also serves on many nonprofit boards, right? And lectures at the Georgetown School of Public Policy, your alma mater. Right. So Jane will bring us the much needed practitioner perspective. And I'm Roy Shapira. I'm a visiting professor here at the Mehrotra Institute, a senior fellow at Harvard's program on corporate governance, and regularly a professor of law at Reichman University. This is the panelists. I want to, before we start, thank the Mehrotra Institute, thank Marcel, and thank Chris May, our executive directors, whose superhuman efforts allowed this to happen. And I'm thanking you for coming here. And I think, like Marcel said, feel free to be active participants. So we'll do the panel, but signal to me if you have questions or something like that. I'll write you down. It also allow me to allocate better the time between the panel and the open kind of Q&A discussion. So feel free to catch my eye while our panelists are speaking. Maybe I guess one last caveat before we start, and the nature of the discussion is that we're going to raise a few examples that might be highly charged across the political spectrum. And when we do so, our idea is not to pick a team, is to analyze the playbook. So with that in mind, let's start with the playbook. Matteo, let's start with you. So when you write a book on corporations in politics in 2026, I guess you must have some line drawing aspect to it, right? So what is exactly those corporate political activities? Can you group them into clusters? So how are they different from all days corporations involvement in politics?
Right, so in the book, I focus mostly on what happened in the last 15 to 20 years, but I make it clear that if we look back in history, there's always been a pendulum of similar pushes for change in through corporations, changes in society through corporations. So I analyze 6 macro areas, including race issues, gender issues, LGBTQ, guns, climate, and democracy. And I look at what corporations have been doing in really after 2010. And I analyze under 2 macro lenses. One, which I call government substitution, is sort of like the activity that corporations entertain to make policy at the corporate level on issues where the government is not acting. So, for instance, you have your own set of emission standards when the U.S. is failing to adopt internal policies to curb carbon emissions. So that's one side of things that I analyze, and then the other side of things, which again in the last 15 years became quite prominent, is the talk that corporations do when they pick up some hot bottom issues and they decide to entertain discussions, or if not outright political fights with politicians, right? And so one of the most the clearest example is what happened between Disney and Ron DeSantis when the Don't Say Gay bill was proposed and then ultimately passed. So those are the 2 macro areas that I analyzed, the talk and the walk parts.
All right, perfect. So Jane, let's switch. So when we talk about this like political posturing and the talks, of course it comes with risks and benefits, right? You may, I think, Matteo, in the book, you mentioned the Nike and Colin Kaepernick. Started with customers burning shoes, ended up with a $5 billion uptick in market cap, right? Kind of a success. Or you can boost employee morale and things like that. Also comes with a lot of risks that you alienate your employees, alienate your investors. Nowadays, alienate maybe the regulators themselves. So how do executives and boards, how do you weigh those potential socioeconomic benefits versus the financial risks of backlash?
Yep. One, I wanted to also say thank you for having us today. It's such a timely topic, and thank you all for coming. I have been in Washington well over 3 decades, and 22 years with Johnson & Johnson in corporate government affairs before that, but my background is really patient advocacy and biomedical research policy. And as David and I were just talking about, I'm kind of an outlier because I never actually worked in government. I always thought, I'll go there, I'll go work at the White House or in Congress. But I found that the power is not only when you're in government, but it's also when we are advocates working with government to educate them and leveraging the stakeholders that are important. So I think to the point about how we navigate, there is no separation between policy and politics. And while we'd love to say that public policy is the way to get to the best outcome, we also know that it can't straight be about public policy. Because if it were only about that and politics were removed, then the American Cancer Society would get everything they want, and nothing they want, and ExxonMobil would get everything they want. There has to be political stakeholder influence and ways that the leverage is presented for the public policy. And as Roy said, we spend as much time on what we don't say as what we do say. And our stakeholders are both the internal stakeholders, meaning our employees, and then the external stakeholders, all of our partners, our competitors, our trade associations, business trades, trade associations for our industry. Johnson & Johnson is no longer the baby shampoo company, which you might know us for, and Band-Aids and Listerine and all of that, kind of that iconic brand. We actually are one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, as well as the largest medical technology company in the world, like Medtronic, where I came from before J&J. So it is not only navigating the industry that we care about, but it's also navigating being a large, multinational, publicly traded company, and how we present ourselves, what we choose to address, what we choose not to address, not because we don't want to, but we must know how to navigate this current administration, for example, or any administration, how to stay favorable and find areas of mutual interest and value. And that lets us earn the right to go and talk about the areas where we don't agree. And that's something that I think is, out of all that we'll talk about tonight, companies must engage, organizations, whether you're a publicly traded company or not, must engage, because again, that allows us to earn the right to bring a difference of opinion and a different solution. And I would also say, J&J, but I'm really here to speak on behalf of, kind of all business and publicly traded companies, is that we will navigate and transcend any political leader, any political regime, any majority or minority in Congress. J&J's been around through 21 different administrations. We've been around 140 years. We're going to be around another 140 years. And that's why these jobs are about understanding the balance, what is of value, and how to really protect and mitigate risk. So I look forward to sharing a little bit more about that. But really that internal and external customer navigation and stakeholder navigation is really, really key. Not easy, especially in such a politically partisan and toxic environment, certainly in Washington, but we've seen it in global capitals all over the world, as well as the states here in the US.
All right, perfect. So speaking of not easy, I'm going to switch to David, because a lot of times those decisions are not just the result of the internal discussions within the company, also the results of companies being pressured to say something, or when it doesn't, it is viewed as complicity. Pressures could come from bottom up. You wrote about the millennial and Gen Z employees and the institutional investors who manage the pension money of these millennial and Gen Z employees. So could you speak a little bit to these outside vectors and how they affect corporate political activity today?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the way, and I admit that my perspective has been, relatively recent history, and I don't doubt that there are cycles when sort of corporations are subject to more and less political pressures. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I've always just thought that, in fact, in the earlier part of my career, when I started in academia, there was very much, I think, the dominant view, which was really only destabilized by the financial crisis of 2008. It was just absolutely accepted that the purpose of the corporation was to maximize returns, maximize share price. And I think it was very, very marginal to take different views of the corporation than that. And I'm not saying that that view is dead. It certainly is not dead. But we've certainly seen a kind of intellectual struggle, a political struggle over the purpose of the corporation. And I do think that it really was turbocharged by the financial crisis, by a sense of strong disconnect between corporate leaders who were still getting huge bonuses as companies were being piloted into the ground and so forth. So it's interesting to see the way these kind of cycles happen. I think there's been no question that we've been coming through an intense period of time, which I would roughly say begins with the financial crisis. You can find antecedents. There certainly were hints before, turbocharged by that crisis. Maybe only now. It'll be interesting to see what the Trump administration's role is in sort of rolling back some of this politics in the corporate and investment space. We shall see. But on a simple level, I think if you have any deep political convictions or commitments, I think it's sort of almost incoherent not to take that into the corporate sphere and into the investment space. I almost used to marvel at what seems to me, maybe it was only temporary, but seemed to me at the time when I started my career, this sort of sense that there really was this wall. Oh, you do your 401k is like over there, and your politics is like in the voting booth. But actually, if you really care about the environment, or you care about workers, or whatever your issues are, it's just, at some point, it's not coherent to separate the two. You can work hard to elect certain people or adopt certain legislation, but so often the facts on the ground that you're trying to shape with that legislation are being created in companies, created in markets in the first place. So I think that there's just been some extent of generational shift. We could talk about generational shift from, Gen X to millennials and sort of, and now on to Gen Z, and sort of the way that these generations deal with politics, think about politics, et cetera. But there's no question that that up until very recently, and I'll just say something very briefly about ESG, right? Many people have probably heard about ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing. You can kind of track the arc. I won't say the rise and fall. It's a little too early to call the fall, but certainly the rise and retreat of environmental, social, and governance investing, which became much the rage to the point that the major kind of most conservative players, even the BlackRocks and the State Streets and the mainstream players of the markets, got involved for a while and now seem to be backing out of it. So there's no question that it feels like we're coming to a moment of transition again, where maybe there's a pulling back on these fronts or a reshaping of it at least. And so it'll be interesting to see where that all goes.
All right, perfect.
Roy, can I just jump in really quickly? I appreciate David's comments about the purpose of a corporation. I wanted to follow up on that because in 2018, our J&J's CEO at the time, who's now retired, Alex Gorski, was the chair of the governance committee at the Business Roundtable. The Business Roundtable is a trade association for businesses, similar to the Chamber of Commerce and other business organizations, the National Association of Manufacturing, all US based, but the US chambers have American Chamber of Commerces all over. So they are the voice of the collective industry that they are representing, and the BRT has cross industry. So back then, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase was the chair, and he convened Alex, our chairman and CEO, Ginny Rometty from IBM, and Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan. And what they came up with was actually a statement very similar to the Johnson & Johnson credo, which is about if we put patients first, we have 4 pillars. If we put patients first, and then the community, and then our employees, and then our shareholders, if we do the top 3 right, then our shareholders will see a fair return. And our credo is over 75 years old. We live by it. But what they decided is why not, in kind of the time where compassionate capitalism became something of great interest, and there was a struggle in the business community about, is it our shareholder who's first because we are publicly traded, or is it the other stakeholders and our employees and the community and the patients or the customers that we serve? And so they put out, under the guise of the Business Roundtable, the purpose of a corporation, and anybody can reach out to any of us, and we can send you all you'd like to see, and what that statement looked like. But what was surprising is here you have 3 of the top CEOs in the world with very successful, financially stable and disciplined companies getting a lot of pushback from certain parties, from certain stakeholders saying, what are you talking about? Not that we don't care about our employees, but that's not the stakeholder that you should be caring about. It should be the shareholder. And so while we and others are proud that CEOs came out and said, if we don't take note of how we can engage and prioritize all of our stakeholders, not just the shareholders, we will not be successful. So I think it was not only a courageous move forward, but something that we thought would be well received was quite controversial, certainly on the Hill, and at that time it was the first Trump administration, who did not push back back then, but we certainly had some of the members of the Republican members of the Banking Committee in particular, focused on finance and financial services, saying that's maybe not a good look for the CEOs of some of the largest corporations to take. So we're still very proud of it. It's still alive today, but it hit exactly what David was referencing in the purpose of a corporation a little bit more formally. Thanks.
So segueing from the last part of Jane's comments on David, Matteo, I think because the book just came out, you had the nice opportunity to revise it after the Trump 2 got into effect, and to talk a little bit about some of those like retreats from companies who used to be very vocal on certain issues are now less vocal. So could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so first day of the second Trump administration, a bunch of executive orders were sent out, and amongst them, flurry targeted DEI, which is a component of ESG, I guess the S part of it, and seeking to make it illegal, or at the very least make it illegal and unviable at the federal level. And so a bunch of corporations overtly retracted from it. Most famous case of all is Meta, with Mark Zuckerberg right before the inauguration going on video with a gold chain and looking like a rapper, and saying that he's now dismantling all the DEI efforts at the company, while only 2 years before he was painting a double-decker bus in rainbow and showing it in New York City. Not all corporations did that. There were some that actually were firm to maintain their commitments. Famously, Apple and Costco had to fight against an anti-DEI shareholder proposal in the spring of 2025, which got defeated because those tend not to attract a lot of votes, actually attract very abysmal votes in favor. I think Jane can comment more, because really they're tracking a lot at the corporate level, but I think we can now see 3 buckets, roughly. Some who are doing a reversal and being open about it. Some others, like Apple and Costco, say, no, we stand our ground. And some others who are quiet and maybe rebrand what they're doing. They don't call it DEI anymore. They use some similar words. But the reality is, to Jane's and David's point, this is not stuff that some woke CEOs want to impose on society. There's this idea that there's this cabal of people who meet in Davos in Switzerland and decide how we all should live. And in reality, as David was putting, these are bottom-up pressures that come from investors, that come from employees. So, just to give you a sense, one of the first movers in LGBTQ rights at the corporate level was Lotus Development, which is the maker of Lotus Notes and other softwares. And we're in the mid-90s, and they decided to expand health benefits to domestic couples, to same-sex couples, right? At a time where there was no marriage equality whatsoever. And so that, we're talking, mid-90s, right? And so you see that there is, since then, there's been some movement. So that's why some would argue that this is not just a separation of, church and state, if you will, but, where, corporations are just another part of civil society. And, people who are employed there are, trying to push their employers to do certain things. And of course, after Lotus Development did that, everybody followed up. And, we see so many other similar issues that happen that way, and maybe that's why they attract some resistance, because sometimes they work. A more recent case that it's analyzed in the book is there were walkouts at some tech companies because of mandatory arbitration for employees who were accusing sexual harassment. They were putting forward sexual harassment claims, but they had signed up to policies where those were arbitrated, and then a couple of walkouts created a movement, and soon enough, Congress passed on a bipartisan, with a bipartisan vote, a law that made it illegal, and Joe Biden signed it. So there's these bottom-up pressures are effective, and it's not necessarily that some CEOs decide to pick up a fight and they want to get a job in a democratic administration.
Right. So regarding the toolkit, David, some of the dynamics that Matteo just mentioned about the last couple of years, we see similar kind of market and legal challenges also on the usage of like the divestment tool. If you're an investor, how do you use it? What are the challenges? What are the risks of using divestment as a tool to affect change in corporate behavior in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very, very skeptical of divestment as a tool. You know, you hear about divestment all the time on college campuses and all kinds of issues. And for me, the analogy that I often try to use is like to divest to make a political point is the equivalent of like not voting as a way of like revolting against the political system. I think it's often not only pointless, but actually counterproductive. When you remain as an investor, you have all kinds of rights. You get to vote on the pay packages of the senior executives. You can sue. You can bring shareholder act. There are all kinds of things that you can do. When you divest, you just lose your voice. And that's not to say, I mean, there probably are moments when it's appropriate to divest, but it's just interesting to me. I think especially people who for the first time are thinking about investment as a site of politics, it's like the gut move, the knee-jerk move is divestment has got to be the move. Well, I mean, actually, I think what it speaks to is like how we really need a corporate civics in this country, like corporate civics education, the way you get like how a bill becomes law when you're a kid in elementary school. I mean, people just don't understand how corporate civics work and really don't understand, I think, on a basic level, the operation of corporations. So I often think that divestment, there's also very little evidence that it has ever actually worked. You know, there's plenty of evidence showing that, well, when you sell, somebody else just buys. You don't know who is buying. They may not care about your political issue at all. And there have been a number of empirical studies about divestment that show that actually the theory behind divestment is it's supposed to hurt the target. You dump their stock, you hurt the company. The problem is there's actually very little evidence that that ever actually happens. So I think actually one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is just like try to raise awareness to people about all the tools that you have, you know, when you are a shareholder and how you can use them. If I want to make one other point, if you don't mind, actually, which is sometimes it's also following these issues now. It's just the virtue of just getting older. But you know, when I first started my career, I remember the first paper I wrote. I looked at like state pension codes, very, very exciting stuff. And what you saw was a very familiar pattern at that time, which is that basically the Republican position was, we don't do politics with investment. We take no criteria into account whatsoever other than maximizing returns. You look in the pension codes of red states, and these were the policies that governed how they make their pension investments. And in blue states, you would see lots of evidence of, we do investments in minority-owned businesses, or we do some piece of green energy, or you would see it break down along those lines. And it's interesting to watch the dance of who is claiming that politics doesn't belong in investment and who is claiming, yes, it does, and we're going to do it. One of the things that really fascinated me over what happened when Texas and Louisiana adopted anti-ESG statutes a couple years ago, the Texas one was just struck down. One of the things I found fascinating was that for most of my career, it was sort of a lefty position that you should do politics with your investment portfolio. And the more conservative position was like a kind of Koch brothers, you know, maximize returns, keep politics out of the boardroom kind of thing. And it's been fascinating to watch that sometimes that just changes and they switch sides. What fascinated me is when Texas adopted their anti-ESG law, which is they say Texas pension plans are going to dump BlackRock and dump investments in companies that are boycotting oil and gas. The reason they made that argument, it amazed me, was because they were very explicit. This is an important industry in Texas and Louisiana. We have lots of people in our states who we need to protect their jobs and protect their livelihoods. I still remember when Detroit was in trouble, the auto industry was in trouble, 2007, 2008, Mitt Romney famously wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying, let Detroit go, let the market do its thing. And the Democrats were saying, we got to protect jobs. But when the anti-ESG statute was adopted in Texas, the Republicans were saying we're doing it to protect jobs. And what astounded me was the kind of left critique of that was, do you know how much your fees went up? That was the main attack. You're paying higher fees now because you're not using BlackRock, you're using these other, you're increasing your costs by limiting who you invest in. So it's just one thing when you pay attention to this stuff is just to like watch who's taking what position on whether politics belongs in the boardroom in the corporate space or not.
Right, thanks so much. So if they're inserting a corporate civics class into the curriculum, they should probably consult with Jane on the syllabus. So Jane, let's bring it back to the internal company level. So the dynamics that David mentioned, a company can be pressured to either come from the inside, from the outside, to speak out on certain political issues. But then the challenge is who speaks on behalf of the corporation, who gets to decide? And do I alienate some of my employees? Do I alienate some of my investors? So how do you guys make the decisions on what issues are we active, on what issues are we staying out of them?
Yeah, and again, as I started at the beginning, we spend as much time talking about what we do say as we do what we don't say and why. And I think, we start with, kind of what the issue is. We start with what's the objective, kind of problem solving 101. But what we know is when you have 140,000 global employees, as we do, or whether you have 40 employees, people do have personal opinions, even if ultimately they recognize that being part of a company, the role is to exceed and to succeed with whatever you're doing, selling or making or services you're providing. It's not necessarily making political statements. So one, we try to continue to talk first to our employees and understand what the vibe is, the feel. On every single issue you can imagine, there are sides on both sides. I mean, whether, again, you have a lot of employees or few employees. And so, but also recognizing that they also understand that we are not here as a company to get involved in people's personal politics. I talk a lot about that because we make political contributions as a company, as do most of our peers, not only in the healthcare space, but multiple industries. We get involved in grassroots advocacy, we get involved in political action committees, we get involved in political contributions here in the US. It's a voluntary contribution, it's fully disclosed. J&J is one of the few companies, irrespective of who's in charge, we tend to be very, very balanced because, as I and many know, politics, the leadership will change like that. Presidents change, majorities change, and if some of our peers go really heavy on one side and light on the other, then they're scrambling to kind of make up for the difference. We believe, because we're here for the long term, that we are going to stay relatively balanced. Now, if you have one party in control, as we do in this administration and the 119th Congress, in the last Congress and the last administration, the Democrats had a trifecta. Now the Republicans have a trifecta. There's likely, at least if you look at the conventional wisdom and the public polling, that at least one chamber will flip coming up in the elections this November. So for the 120th Congress, we're looking at likely divided government once again, which makes legislating even that much more difficult. But getting back to what companies decide to do, we say, who are we, and where is our voice going to be welcomed, of value, maybe not agreed with, but what are we trying to get at that our voice would lend support somewhere? Again, many times we will defer to a trade association to have that voice on behalf of aggregated industry. And when it comes to tax policy and J&J, as many companies, we're dealing not just with our industry issues on pharmaceutical pricing and tariffs. We're also and regulatory pathways. We're dealing with IP and, again, tax, trade, workforce, and things that you don't even know about that you maybe never see attached to J&J, and trade controls, all of that. So there are many issues, and if we spent time and leveraged our CEO to talk about every single one, it'd be kind of like the boy who cried wolf. At some point, you become irrelevant because all you're doing is talking about the issues of the day when you really do have to deliver for all of the stakeholders that I referenced in our credo. And so I think the way that I would say in general that we have approached a lot of the social issues, and we were there on January 6th. We were not in the Capitol. If you remember, it was COVID. I have a lot of friends who were in the Capitol that day. That was a very, it still is, a very challenging time, whatever someone's politics may be. It was chaos, it was dangerous, people were afraid. Before that, George Floyd. There are so many things that our employees say, why aren't we taking a stand? But we have to be somewhat objective and evaluate what does our voice offer to the dialogue. And if it offers a voice that we feel good about because we're making a statement, but it doesn't actually help who we are, what we stand for, and it may actually distract from where we do want to add our voice when it comes to scientific evidence, when it comes to cures and treatments, when it comes to patient-centered outcomes. That's what we want to do when it comes to tax policy, for example, that will help to compel more manufacturing, both here in the US and around the globe. We have to be very selective and disciplined about where we speak. And Roy, to your question about who speaks, we make sure that we are very narrow in who will speak from a perspective of, if we have, we can't control necessarily people, what they say on social media. There's definitely a feeling at not just our company, I think overall, that we do not encourage, in fact, we very much discourage people from trying to be, very political on social media. I'm an old person. LinkedIn and Facebook are kind of the only social media, but I've got kids in college and high school, and they're all over the other things. But even as a head of government affairs, I've never done a political post in my life. I never would, even if I were in a different role or industry. I just think that's not something for the world to see. I want to have dialogue with people I care about and know, and make it meaningful, not tell the world, not because I'm trying to hide anything, but I would just say that's a little bit how we approach it at J&J. But between Supreme Court decisions and reproductive rights, LGBTQ, EOs on DEI, there has been a lot of push. The war in Gaza, Israel, back then, and now with Iran, trust me, we are pushed to make a statement on everything, and we take that very seriously, and we are, I would say, very judicious in where we come out publicly.
Perfect. So, okay, so we got already a couple of questions. So remind me if you want to ask questions that give me a signal. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we also discuss kind of the societal angle and not just the risk or promises to the company. Before that, Matteo, a fact that Jane mentioned at the beginning reminded me of another important observation, I think, from your book. So Jane referenced the number of employees that Johnson & Johnson has. And if I recall correctly, in the book, you're saying that all the dynamics that we've been discussing here and that you read about in the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or in academic circles, this is basically just kind of the really big companies. So we have here MBA students either currently working in or will work in like a mid-level or a small B2B supplier. They don't even have the luxury to think about those issues, because if you make the wrong turn on political activity, you can alienate like one purchaser who's 30% of your revenue streams, right? So this is basically just a really big company's game, right?
It depends, right? It depends your line of business. Of course, if you're Johnson & Johnson, you have pretty much the entire world as your potential customer, right? They're buying all your products. So what Jane just discussed makes perfect sense. You want to be extremely sensitive and really look at what your contribution is going to be from a political standpoint. There are others who care a little less. So in that, some level of controversy can be good for their business, right? Nike did that with the Colin Kaepernick ad, and it paid off well. PepsiCo tried to do the same with a soda ad with Kyle Jenner, and it completely backlashed because it was considered not authentic. So it's a risk proposition at the end of the day. You got to be good at it. I'm a lawyer, so I'm not going to be the person who's going to make that call. But there are people who are going to school to figure this out. People in PR, communication. And they know the ins and the outs. Of course, they need to know their business, right? If you are, a business-to-business, manufacturer of some industrial equipment, of course, you don't really want to invade the political space. But if you are in another line of business, then you should, I guess, right? If you're selling other types of products. So just like anything else, there are people in charge who are paid a good amount of money to make those risks, to make these judgments around risk. And if they do it right, they're going to be rewarded. If they don't do it right, they're going to have big consequences. And that's what we're seeing. At times, look at Disney. Disney got, its back was pushed against the wall, right? Because it turned out that they were making political contribution to the sponsor of the Don't Say Gay bill. And so that word came out on the Orlando Sentinel, which is the local newspaper in Orlando, and a bunch of screen players, a bunch of stakeholders that Disney had, started to tweet and say, well, this is full hypocrisy, what are you doing? And so at that moment, they did not have a very good option there, right? So they opted to speak. We don't have the counterfactual, whether it would have been better or worse if they stayed silent, because we don't have counterfactuals in real life. But they decided to do that, and they decided to do that by escalating and doing all the things you're supposed to do in corporate governance, high-level management meetings, board meetings. And at the end of the day, DeSantis retaliated because that's what he wanted, right? Because he built his national politics and he ran for the Republican ticket based on, we have too many woke corporations. So in the end, you got to be addressing it as any other risk. The idea that, as we were starting before, business and politics is not the same, and we have some colleagues who say, well, students in business schools study business and finance but don't study politics. That's completely different. Well, I'm not sure that in 2026 this is still true, right? Look how many people showed up here. This is relevant. People should be aware that this is one of the many areas of risk that you have when you run a business, and you have to do it in the same way you run any areas of risk.
All right, one last question for me before we open up to the audience. Just a societal perspective. So like Matteo started us off by saying we have those corporate political posturing and taking stances, and there's companies substituting government in certain areas. And we kind of have this sense built up, whether it's objectively true or not, that this is the only viable policy path. Government is dysfunctional, is gridlocked, whatever, and companies could do better on like the examples of climate change or minority rights that we discussed earlier. So what are the risks? Is it effective? Is it, from a societal perspective, that we should count on those private companies to step in when government is not working?
Well, I mean, you made a point earlier in referencing, speaking with Matteo about how, well, at much smaller companies, we don't see as much of this. You see it more at big companies. And that makes a ton of sense, whether it's an entity like J&J or thinking about institutional investors. I mean, one aspect of maybe why we see this in the big companies and why we see this at large institutional investors is because actually they operate globally in a way that almost no one else does. I mean, legislation, regulation, these are still fundamentally local phenomena. Now, granted, there's local United States, which is a big player. There are others, pretty much everybody else is smaller than that. Even so, there are companies that are operating globally in multiple political environments with different political parties, and the same is true for institutional investors. So to some extent, you're talking about some of the only entities in the world that operate in a global kind of way, and it's natural that when you're talking about global issues, let's say climate change would be one of them, that you would have to look to such institutions to play a role, because they're almost, in some ways, almost the only ones that really operate in this like kind of trans-jurisdictional way. Is this good? Is it bad? There are serious questions about democratic accountability that come in when you talk about these kinds of entities wielding, power in a kind of transnational way. And is it even good for? Is it good for a society that's so much power? I mean, we can make arguments back and forth. And part of what is obviously the case is like there are voters, but those same people are also consumers, and they're also investors and wearing different hats. So to some extent, you are able to, back to kind of where we started, you are able to use your voice as an investor in a kind of global way that you just can't as a voter. So there's certain mismatches there that I think are worth thinking about. Is it good? Is it bad? Again, I don't know. One other quick comment, which is just, speaking to this political divergence, I remember during the first Trump administration, like I was talking, this is sort of fairly regular contact with these kind of socially responsible investor folks out of London. And they're always talking about how in Europe, as far as the regulators were concerned, they could never do enough ESG. And in America, they were always doing far too much of it. And so they're constantly facing different pressures in Europe and in the United States over how much ESG to be doing. And we see similar political divergence right now. So it's all just part of this dance.
I know that Jane and Matteo both have things to say about that, but let's get to the questions first, and then maybe you can come back, please. And please present yourself and tell me if I need to repeat the question for the.
So sorry, one moment. I'm Andy King. I am at Boston University. I also am organizing a conference for the fall called Beyond Corporate Sustainability. And we would answer that question very differently. We're all old greenies that gone back to the 70s, and we're sick of corporations. We no longer believe corporations can be good for anything. We basically think Milton Friedman was descriptively right, maybe not prescriptively right, but descriptively right. The whole idea that ESG, which was mostly about single materiality, was going to do anything was empty from the beginning. The Business Roundtable statement was good PR. Basically, it's kind of here are the mechanisms for profit, and we still believe in profit, but we're going to sell it as we now have purpose. I think if we were to, even just what you said now, yeah, sure, financial institutions cross around the world, but you'd already said, taking your money out doesn't do anything, so what good is that? And we would even argue that this whole notion of corporate sustainability, which we no longer believe in, even though I started the Alliance for Research on Corporate Sustainability, is meaningful, it can't be measured. We would just like it to go away and go back to the belief that we need to recreate our institutions and not hope for corporate action. And in fact, the hope in corporate action, which corporations have sold us for many years, has been a major impediment to progress.
Thanks so much, Andy. So Matteo has written about it. Yeah.
Well, I agree. When I talk about the risks of all of this, at the end of the day, from a societal perspective, we don't want, especially this is like a very much American thing, right? Because of gridlock Congress, and so we sense the need to have somebody else intervene. In the long run, if we keep doing this, we sort of forget about what institutions are, what democratic institutions are, what we should be doing as citizens. It becomes a distraction, right? Instead of talking about the issue, about carbon emissions, about actual DEI, we talk about, oh, Apple did this, and Costco did that, and Meta did this. And why are we talking about the corporations while we want to talk about the issues? But at the same time, this is going to happen no matter what, right? Whether we like it or not, corporations are going to occupy these spaces. So I think we have to reconcile a pragmatic reality that they're going to be here to stay. Different times with different voices, because depending on where the political pendulum swings. But we got to be very aware that it's going to be the citizens. So one thing that we all recall, unfortunately, after the killing of Alex Preti and Renee Good in Minneapolis, if you recall, it was one of the rare instances where during the second Trump administration, corporations spoke again, and it was the local Chamber of Commerce that organized this collective action letter with 60 CEOs of Minnesota-based businesses that pretty much said, can you please get along? Can you please de-escalate? It looked like they were the children of a couple who was fighting. They did not want to take sides. They did not finger point whether ICE was bad policy or what have you. They just wanted a de-escalation. But why were they doing it? Well, because the businesses were at risk, right? But why were they doing it? Because there was a bottom-up pressure from civil society and in Minnesota and around the country that said, this is going too far. We got to intervene. Was that what made the reversal and had some people fired from their jobs? Who knows, right? at the end of the day, though, there was this bottom-up pressure, which was from democratic institutions, from citizens, that sort of propelled corporations to intervene somehow. So to David's point, you may use from time to time the sort of megaphone or the sort of amplifier. You may have these alliance with them, but just know there is there's a temporary alliance. You're not going to be with them for a long time because otherwise you have Mark Zuckerberg as your ally that's going to drop you. And so, yes.
I just want to add to that if I could. I totally understand your point. It's a very valid point. And I understand your skepticism about corporate sustainability. The question is, you trust the Trump administration more? Do you trust the administration of Vladimir Putin and the oil that that country controls? Or the Saudi government more on sustainability issues? The question is, what are the alternatives? What are the realistic, viable alternatives? Right? That's one issue, right? It's very easy to critique this sustainability. There's plenty of critique about it. I totally agree. What actually is the realistic alternative? Maybe there's no alternative, I don't know. But what's the realistic alternative? Electoral politics, get back to building power from the ground up? I'm skeptical. That's one point. And the second point I would also say is that I think that the Greens have been completely incoherent and inconsistent on these issues for decades, just decades. Classic example is on the divest versus engage question. Half of the green movement and the environmental movement has been all about divesting, and the other half has been about, let's run people to the board of Exxon and get environmentalists on the board of Exxon. I mean, this has been going on for 20 years, where if you had, I think if like the entire environmental movement had either gone in on corporate sustainability or had all rejected it, you might have had more effectiveness in one direction or the other. But part of it is that I do think that there has been a circular firing squad a little bit, where you have people who are taking divestment and let's dump it and let's get out of this right now, and others are like, no, let's do the change from within. It's really hard when you're not aligned. It's a complex problem. It's a really complex problem. And I'm also, at this point, particularly skeptical, I would say, about corporate sustainability, for sure. I am.
Is either corporations, Donald Trump, or Vladimir Putin is a false choice.
Okay, what are you pointing to then? What is the real choice?
I'm saying one of the problems of believing in corporations for so many years, and I've been to these talks for 30 years where corporations come in and say, used to be we're doing greening, we're reducing our waste over and over. And what has happened? Non-governmental organizations have become aligned with corporations. Rather than being antagonistic, rather than using courts, rather than pushing for the
courts? I'm a law professor. No, not going to work. Courts. You think the courts are going to, what are the courts going to do? I'm asking you again, what is the alternative? I understand the critique, but tell me what the alternative is.
We used to have regulation in this country. We passed the Clean Water Act. We passed the Clean Air Act. We had SARA Title III. We had all of those things. And then in the 90s, we began to believe we can't do it through the government anymore. We have to do it through corporations. That became part of the trope of the environmental movement. And you talked about the circular firing squad, which is then blaming these people. What did they try? Yes, they tried putting people on the board of Exxon. It didn't work. Look what happened. They ended up doubling down and buying more gas and oil. Yes, they tried divesting, but you said it didn't work. And we've had, indeed, from academics, many academics, bullshit sold to us for year after year about these mechanisms, and we got to stop doing it.
Democratic processes put in power the majority legislatures in Texas and Louisiana and elsewhere that passed the anti-ESG laws. The reality is that there is small d popular Democratic support for some of these positions that you despise. I want to tell you about an interaction that I had that I think is worth. I teach in the Harvard.
It's just the way to make money.
I teach in the trade union program, okay, and we bring in labor leaders from all around the country. And I remember a conversation with a unionized steel worker, okay, from the United Steelworkers. Sorry, okay, where he was talking about. He works on oil rigs, and he makes $160,000 a year, high school education. He says, I love the idea of Green New Deal, which, by the way, a bunch of the unions came out against the Green New Deal. But I love the idea of Green New Deal. I love the idea of green jobs. I just haven't seen anywhere close to a job that's going to pay me what I get paid now, or even any unionized jobs in those spaces. So it's. I think we can agree it's really complicated.
Right, so let's get
Yeah,
Jane's
I'll just
perspective.
briefly, so one, thank you for speaking and your comments, because it's giving us a lot to react to. I think from a corporation's perspective, one, I would say it's usually big companies bad, the startups cool, great. Business is an ecosystem. It's small, it's startups, it's medium size, it's large. We are all corporate. Corporate means together. It's not about size. It's not about that we have 140,000 and we're publicly traded, but that startup is really cool and they have no rules and they are not held to the same standards, but we all work together. So that's one. But two, I would say, I heard you say it's just for PR. I can only speak right now for J&J, but the fact that we do things that we never send out a press release about, you've probably seen on television our campaign for Nursing's Future. We have been dedicated to nurses for over 100 years, to educate nurses, loan forgiveness programs, not because we're selling a product that we profit off of with nurses. They don't prescribe things. They care for people. And we also have been involved in things that are completely unbranded. The Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, Dr. Lorna Breen was the first physician during COVID at New York Presbyterian who took her own life on April 26th of 2020 because she was so burnt out, she was afraid to ask for help and had nowhere to turn. And her family came to J&J and said, we love what you do, you know how to touch patients and touch people. Our sister killed herself because she thought her license would be in jeopardy. And we, not branded, have gotten involved. We got the bill passed. President Biden talked about it on his first State of the Union in 2021, doing the right thing based on our credo, not because there's any profit, not because there's any branding, and definitely not because there was any PR for J&J. So I think sometimes companies at any size, we don't want to send out press releases. We want to do the right thing about our 1 million hours a year that our employees do volunteering, and we give them that time off. What we do for military benefits and spouses. Some people might send out press releases. We don't. That's why I've been at J&J for 22 years. But I really dislike when corporations are just lumped into something, just like every man with glasses in this room must be awful. No, everyone's individual, different, and driven. I'm just saying, but driven by different motivations and factors, and there are absolutely bad actors in every industry, every institution, every corporation, but there are also good, mission-driven employees who are, again, part of a business ecosystem, part of the vendors who we employ, as well as our own employees and the customers we serve. So just, please keep an open mind when we make such gross generalizations about all industry or all corporations.
Thank you so much. We have one final,
Two
more.
yes,
Two? Okay,
yes.
so Scott first. Scott, could you please present yourself?
Certainly. My name is Scott Hurst. I teach at the law school, and I'm delighted to see many law students in the audience. I have a question for Jane, and I guess it's following up on Andy's question. And I understand that J&J has been a leader in the field of climate emissions, and for many years, even before it was
Long before.
a real conversation.
Before it was cool. Yeah,
before
that's
it was cool. And there's strong record on voluntary emissions. But J&J, I guess, is also a member of some large trade organizations, like especially the National Association of Manufacturers and the United States Chamber of Commerce, which were some of the leaders in trying to dismantle EPA regulation and SEC disclosure of climate change. How do you think about J&J's membership of those organizations, and how does that square with what J&J does and the role that you play in those organizations?
So, such a great question, and we've received, as many in industry receive, kind of oversight and investigation correspondence from Capitol Hill saying, why are you members of the chamber? And we will always respond. And what we will say is that any trade association, just like any organization, or again, corporate environment, meaning gathering together, whether it's a synagogue or a church or a school, do we agree with 100% of what that organization of whom we are part says, does? I think there are times that we will withdraw if it gets to a point where there's more dissent than there is collaboration, but we have to assess how much value there is in the overall engagement and membership. And I think with the chamber, I would say we've been chamber members for a long time. We're not on the board. We are very active with the National Association of Manufacturers, and we're active with the Business Roundtable. Those are probably two more. Nothing against the chamber, but again, any organization, we're big members of pharma. Does that mean we agree with everything pharma does, even though we're on the board and we're a member? No, because we have our own voice. And what we do is able to be leveraged. And what we also do is not pick a fight with our peers and with industry publicly. We talk about it behind the scenes. We talk about it in the executive committee meetings and the board meetings. And there was a lot of controversy around membership of the US Chamber. But when we look at the different areas where they understand the dynamic of the relevance of business and the relevance of industry and the relevance of being employers, large, small, or medium, that's why we are members there. And also, remember what I said at the beginning, if we run away, and I love your point about divestiture, if we run away, we forfeit the opportunity to have a difference of opinion. And if we run away and say, this stinks, I don't agree, I'm picking up my toys and leaving the sandbox, then you have no ability to bring a different perspective and to engage in a different way and hopefully come to a different conclusion. And I can tell you very, very openly and transparently that J&J has played a role because we are a large company, because we have a consumer brand. We have been able to leverage our credo and how we make decisions to then engage with others to kind of come together. And that's the way that these trade associations make decisions. It's based on the board. The CEOs or the business leaders sit on the board with rationale and support collectively. And so I think that's been a challenge, but we still feel that the value, even if we don't agree 100% of the time, which think of all the organizations or groups that you're part of, do you agree with 100%? Rarely. I always like to say if two people agree on everything, only one person's thinking, which was my quote in the yearbook. So I think Winston Churchill, I don't remember. But we have to live on differences of opinion and come to an aligned compromise. So I think that's how we assess the value. But we definitely have withdrawn from some over the 22 years I've been at J&J.
Okay, one final question. All right.
Hi, my name is Shayna. I'm a Master's of Public Health student at BU. And I was wondering, is there an example of a time when J&J did make a political commentary that actually helped strengthen the positioning of the company and its objectives?
I'm trying to think, a political statement. So, irrespective of who, is in the White House, we've always been engaged, never given politically to administrations. We tried to be involved in what's called the PIC, it's the Presidential Inauguration Committee, when Biden was elected, but we were told no pharma companies. We don't like pharma, but then of course they let Pfizer get in and Amgen, from what we understand, but we were told no.
Overturning Roe v. Wade?
So Roe v. Wade and the decision at the Supreme Court, because we are a healthcare company, we did make a statement to our employees about we will do whatever we need to do to maintain access to healthcare for all employees, women, men, young, old, which shared, if you have to go cross state boundaries, we will help with that access. We did not specifically talk about reproductive rights. But again, this is where we try to address the issues that people are thinking about without making a political stand, because then you, as I think Roy said, you're going to alienate 50% right off the bat. And so we wanted to stay consistent, being a healthcare company and being one of the most prolific companies, making sure that our employees and their families have access to all healthcare across the board. So I think that was one. It wasn't a political statement, but it was engaging more publicly in a very, very, very divisive political issue, if that helps. But we did not make a statement on, again, publicly on things like January 6th, the different global tensions, but we do reach out and communicate with our employees on a regular basis, recognizing and actually embracing and welcoming differences of opinion.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, based on what Jen just said, that it's very hard to draw a line on what's political and what's not, because just this example, everything is political if you want to portray it that way, and the moment you try to define it, you're going to just fail miserably. On January 6th, a bunch of other companies actually said a lot of things. So when I do my PowerPoint presentation and I show how vocal corporations were during the first Trump administration, I have a screenshot of the CNN Business webpage with all the statements after January 6th by CEOs, right? And I had to cut it because I had to scroll for like 3 different screenshots, and at some point I'm like, people are going to be bored. But a lot of people intervened back then. Why? Well, probably because everybody thought that Trump was done, and it wasn't, and so they thought, well, now I can speak my mind. It depends. On certain things, though, the line is this political or not? Probably not, and it affects our business, yes. So we have to say something, and we'll say something.
And I will say on January 6th, we did, because again, a statement's one thing, but what are you doing? An action, we think, always speaks louder than a statement, than a word that you can be up on a professor's screen. What are we actually doing? And we did make the decision to halt all political contributions, Republican, Democrat, House, Senate. We just stopped and said it's time to reset, it's time to reevaluate. And then we did ultimately start again, but everybody was watching who's giving to the number of those who either voted for impeachment, didn't vote for impeachment on Trump. I mean, we are under a microscope, and I think that that's right when you're a publicly traded company. But I would say not just looking at the statements, who says what are companies actually doing, and if they're doing it right, it will be transparent, and you will find that on their website, as we share in all of our political contributions, for example.
But January 6th also gives us, and this was really the last point, an interesting counterbalance to what we were saying before, sort of go in David's direction, which is 2 salient actions from 2 corporations at the time did what politics couldn't do because of constitutional limits, right? Both Facebook at the time and Twitter at the time, pre-Musk, kicked out Trump, right? Those are 2 rather political actions, initiatives, right? That so sometimes you have certain things that could be done only by corporations. There's a lot of talk about what can be achieved by corporations on gun control, because we have the Second Amendment, and so in the United States, there's only so much that politics can go, but financial institutions have tried and ultimately failed to try to block the industry in that direction.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane, David, Matteo. Please read his book. It's really a very interesting book to read, and Roy as well for leading this conversation. I think this is a topic that I think should stimulate much more kind of conversations, because I think it's one of the most important topics of our time. I think there are big questions about what is the role of political system, corporations, and so on. And I really just appreciate that your willingness to be here and to engage, and to the audience to come here and also hopefully go home with a lot of thoughts and ideas. And I promise that at this institute we will have further conversation of that kind, because I think that's really valuable for what we can do in terms of civic education and so on. So I would like to thank.
Thank you.
And we have a reception here. So
continuing the conversation over there.
Exactly.
Oh.
So please stay around. So
thanks
thank
so much
you
to
so
the
much, and
panelists.
give the
Thank you for having us.
applause.